New York was not built once. It was erased, sold, burned, demolished, and rebuilt, again and again. Beneath every famous tower is a fight over land, light, money, power, and who gets to stay. Before Manhattan was a grid, it was Mannahatta, forests, streams, wetlands, and Lenapehoking. Then one plan turned the island into numbers, blocks, addresses, and real estate. Tenements packed families into darkness, while mansions and museums rose only streets away. Steel, elevators, and zoning taught New York to build, not outward, but into the sky. Welcome to Lantern History, where architecture reveals the hidden forces that shape a city. In the next hour, we will cross 4 centuries, from Lenape trails to super tall towers and climate walls. Before we begin, tell us in the comments, which city and country are you watching from? Now look past the skyline. Our story begins before New York existed. Glaciers carved ridges, valleys, wetlands, and exposed bedrock, the hidden terrain beneath every street and tower. Before 1609, the island was a mosaic of forests, streams, ponds, salt marshes, and hundreds of habitats. Manhattan was part of Lenapehoking, a living homeland shaped by indigenous knowledge, movement, cultivation, and stewardship. Parts of Broadway follow routes linked to the indigenous Wickwasgeck Trail, a path later absorbed into the colonial city. Henry Hudson's 1609 voyage pulled the harbor deeper into European trade networks and opened the way for Dutch colonization. New Amsterdam was imagined as an orderly, fortified colony, but the built town developed more irregularly around trade, land, and defense. At the island's southern tip, Fort Amsterdam joined military force, government, and commerce in a single institutional node. Much of today's Water and South Streets were built on landfill. The colonial shoreline sat farther inland. The Costello Plan records parcels, canals, houses, docks, and defenses, but not a perfectly executed master plan. Roads, farms, defenses, and buildings in New Amsterdam were also made through the labor of enslaved Africans. The African burial ground reveals a landscape contested among subsistence, black ritual life, colonial control, and urban expansion. Churches, markets, and taverns were more than buildings. They were where news, trade, worship, and local government converged. Narrow, deep harbor lots shaped facade rhythm and established a property geometry that survived in later commercial blocks. When the English took the town in 1664, its name changed to New York, but its streets and property lines endured. English government did not erase Dutch building and property customs overnight. The city remained layered, multilingual, and hybrid. By the 18th century, symmetry, brick facades, and classical proportion became the architectural language of imperial respectability. The Morris Jumel Mansion combines Palladian planning and a columned entrance in Manhattan's oldest surviving house. Completed in 1766, St. Paul's Chapel remains a rare Georgian survivor and a living point of continuity on Broadway. As trade and population grew, narrow streets intensified. Fire, sanitation, and circulation problems demanded new ideas. By the 1760s, New York was a major Atlantic port. Revolution would soon remake its institutions, buildings, and public symbols. In the 1760s, imperial government and commercial confidence occupied the same narrow harbor streets and brick facades. France's tavern joined commerce, politics, and social life in a single colonial building near the old shoreline. The Great Fire of 1776 destroyed hundreds of buildings, physically breaking the city's architectural continuity during war. For a few years, New York served as the new nation's capital, and civic architecture staged Republican authority. Transforming the old City Hall into Federal Hall was an early example of adapting an existing building to a new political order. Thin brick walls, fan lights, delicate lintels, and restrained classical details defined the young republic's federal style. On a narrow lot, the merchant house stacked service, display, family, and sleeping rooms into a vertical social machine. Fire risk encouraged brick and stone over timber. Material choice became a question of safety, insurance, and urban control. City Hall combined French Renaissance and American Georgian influences, turning civic ambition into a marble monument. As the port grew denser, investors looked north, and irregular landholding made a comprehensive street plan increasingly attractive. The 1811 plan divided growth into measurable blocks, joining government, speculation, access, and infrastructure in one framework. Broad north-south avenues and frequent cross streets linked movement to a vast inventory of saleable land. Connectivity and block dimensions helped concentrate commerce on avenues, while shaping residential and industrial patterns on side streets. To impose the paper grid, hills were cut and valleys filled. Engineering rewrote the island's natural surface. Broadway cut diagonally across the grid, producing triangular lots and the future sites of Union, Madison, and Times Squares. The plan favored circulation and development over great civic squares. Later generations answered that absence with parks. The Erie Canal connected New York Harbor to the continental interior, rapidly expanding warehouses, counting houses, and housing demand. Brick warehouses and ship masts formed a new commercial wall along South Street, the engine room of the growing city. Columns, heavy lintels, and sharp cornices turned the young republic's ideals into a classical architectural ancestry. Standard lots encouraged repeated rowhouses, whose individual facades joined into a continuous urban street wall. Ferry service made Brooklyn Heights an early suburb for Manhattan merchants, filling the slope with orderly rowhouses. The raised stoop separated the formal entrance from service access below, making class hierarchy visible on the facade. A former potter's field became Washington Square, and the houses around it established a new geography of urban status. Bond Street houses displayed merchant wealth through classical doors, iron balconies, and unusually generous interiors. Numbered streets simplified navigation, making the abstract grid visible in daily addresses and movement. Rapid growth exposed shortages of clean water, sewers, and fire protection. Architecture had become a citywide systems problem. The Croton system brought clean water to the city, transforming health, firefighting, fountains, and building density. Brick houses and workplaces grew taller, but stairs still limited height. Iron and elevators would unlock the next leap. The grid offered an endlessly adaptable urban framework, while permanently strengthening the treatment of land as a commodity. After 1840, immigration, industry, and new materials filled the grid with a denser, darker, and more diverse city. After 1840, millions of immigrants transformed New York's housing, workplaces, and neighborhoods, testing architecture through extreme density. Five Points became notorious for poor housing, but it was also a dense meeting ground of immigrant cultures, labor, and street life. Many early tenements began as single-family houses divided into rooms. The plan stayed almost the same while occupancies multiplied. Owners soon built specifically for many families, using narrow lots, long corridors, and rear rooms with too little light. Built in 1863, 97 Orchard Street lets us read thousands of immigrant lives through one ordinary tenement building. A second building was often added behind the street house, shrinking the yard and reducing air and daylight even further. The 1867 law introduced basic safety and sanitation standards, while also giving reformers new tools to classify and control the poor. The 1879 air shaft produced the dumbbell plan, a solution on paper that often became a chimney, for odor, noise, and fire. Jacob Riis made the housing crisis visible, but his photographs must also be read critically for the biases of the reforming gaze. Immigrant communities built churches, beer halls, clubs, and shops, creating their own public architecture within the dense city. Eastern European Jewish migration placed synagogues, schools, and charities inside crowded blocks, reorganizing religious and civic life. Brownstone cladding and Italianate or Neo-Grec details turned a material into the visual identity of entire neighborhoods. Tall parlor windows, rounded arches, and heavy cornices gave the Italianate row house a vertical and imposing character. Neo-Grec carving used sharp geometry and stylized motifs, bringing controlled variety to mass-produced row house streets. Ferries and horse car lines expanded Brooklyn's row house neighborhoods, joining house, garden, and street into a middle-class environment. Greenwood turned burial into a landscaped excursion through curving roads, monuments, and romantic scenery, an important precedent for urban parks. Central Park offered health and shared landscape, while also directing urban behavior into a more controlled form of public life. The park site was not empty. Seneca Village and other settlements were condemned, and their residents were displaced. Olmsted and Vaux separated crosstown traffic below grade and composed the park as an uninterrupted rural illusion. Central Park looks natural, but its lakes, rock cuts, soils, and planting were products of immense engineering and labor. Bethesda Terrace joined stair, arcade, fountain, and view into an open-air public room at the park's center. At Prospect Park, Olmsted and Vaux created a more unified landscape through the long meadow, ravine, water, and topography. Cast iron facade parts were factory-made and assembled on site, making stone-like commercial fronts faster and repeatable. Slender metal elements allowed larger windows and open floors, first for commerce, later for artists and housing. The Hawkwout building joined a serial cast-iron facade with an early passenger elevator, modernizing the department store. The safety elevator made upper floors accessible and valuable, freeing height from the physical limit of the stair. Sugar, shipbuilding, warehousing, and manufacturing turned the waterfront into a vast productive landscape surrounded by worker housing. The Brooklyn Bridge joined stone towers and steel cables, accelerating the economic and spatial convergence of two cities. Mid-century New York became a laboratory where bearing masonry, cast iron, and emerging steel competed on the same streets. By 1880, parks, bridges, apartments, and loft buildings had turned New York into the architectural stage of a national metropolis. When the Brooklyn Bridge opened in 1883, stone towers and steel cables transformed engineering into a public monument. Pointed stone arches suggested historical authority, while steel cables announced a new industrial age. The central promenade turned infrastructure into a place to see the city and experience metropolitan life together. Elevators, services, and grand lobbies helped the apartment overcome suspicion and become an elite housing type. The Dakota presented apartment living as a palace complex, through its courtyard, steep roofs, services, and monumental mass. The Osborne's Romanesque exterior and lavish interiors proved that an apartment building could rival the row house as a status symbol. Large apartment buildings used courts and light wells to bring daylight into deep lots, making planning a technical as well as social problem. Romanesque revival used heavy masonry, deep arches, and picturesque massing to project permanence in a rapidly changing city. Its Victorian Gothic tower turned an everyday municipal building into a neighborhood landmark. Militia armories entered residential districts like medieval fortresses, with massive walls outside and enormous drill halls within. Industrial fortunes became visible in private houses, modeled on French chateaux and Italian palazzi along Fifth Avenue. Hunt joined European academic design with American wealth, enlarging the scale of the mansion and museum. The Villard houses arranged several homes behind one palace front, adapting the Italian urban palazzo to a New York block. The Met's monumental Beaux-Arts facade unified a building that had grown in pieces, turning culture into urban ceremony. Symmetrical courts and Romanesque classical facades placed science inside an encyclopedic architectural order. The Brooklyn Museum was planned at a far greater scale than it was built. Today's structure is a fragment of that ambition. Carnegie Hall's brick and terracotta facade defined the concert hall as a public cultural institution rather than an aristocratic palace. A temporary celebration structure became a permanent marble monument, using axis and procession to shape public memory. From clubs to campuses, the firm made classical order a shared language of New York's institutions. Columbia's plan placed Low Library on an elevated axis, turning the university into a civic monument. World's fairs and Beaux-Arts training spread the belief that ordered boulevards and monumental public buildings could improve society. Statue, pedestal, and harbor approach combined into a single national image at the threshold of migration. Ellis Island turned migration into an architectural sequence of inspection halls, corridors, stairs, and waiting rooms. Red brick and French Renaissance details gave federal authority a familiar monumental form. Towers, lights, and temporary facades turned entertainment into architectural spectacle and made leisure another designed urban experience. Electric light changed the nighttime identity of buildings, turning theaters, hotels, and amusements into moving surfaces of publicity. Grand Concourse was planned as a broad, tree-lined urban spine that would organize the Bronx's modern growth. Joining Manhattan, Brooklyn, Queens, the Bronx, and Staten Island forced infrastructure and architecture to operate at metropolitan scale. Bridges, museums, apartments, and boulevards made New York not only larger, but consciously theatrical as a world metropolis. Behind monumental stone facades, elevators, steel, and real estate finance were preparing a new building type, the skyscraper. The skyscraper was not one invention. It emerged when elevators, steel, fireproofing, telephones, and expensive land worked together. Before the elevator, upper floors were inconvenient. After it, light and views increased value, reversing the rental hierarchy. Steel separated structural load from the exterior wall, allowing the facade to become a lighter skin hung from a frame. Because steel weakens in heat, columns and beams were wrapped in terracotta, making modern height inseparable from fire science. The tower building was an early New York milestone in skeletal construction, producing more rentable space on a narrow lot. Its red brick and terracotta mass enclosed a vast trading hall inside a towered Romanesque composition. The American Surety Building refined early skyscraper proportions by combining a steel frame, deep foundations, and a classical tower composition. With many floors and twin domes, Park Row carried the office demand of Newspaper Row into the sky. Newspapers turned presses and offices into vertical brands, making architecture part of the competition for attention. Broadway's diagonal cut through the grid produced the triangular site. That gave the Fuller Building its defining form. The Flatiron dressed a steel frame in Beaux-Arts terracotta, giving unfamiliar technology a familiar architectural face. Wind stories and photography transformed the Flatiron from a building into an early mass media icon. The subway carried workers and customers from distant neighborhoods into the center, feeding the density above ground. Ceramic name panels and color codes turned early subway stations into a legible architectural identity system. When the Times moved into its new tower, Longacre Square became Times Square. Media even rebranded the city's geography. Its slender tower converted height into corporate identity, briefly becoming the tallest building in the world before later demolition. Modeled on the Campanile of San Marco, the MetLife Tower made corporate power visible above Madison Square. Flatiron, MetLife, and neighboring towers formed an early skyline through competition, visibility, and shared urban space. The municipal building gathered the administration of the consolidated city inside a giant arch and tower linked directly to transit. The Woolworth joined neo-Gothic detail, steel framing, and fast elevators in the image of a cathedral of commerce. Light terracotta and deep vertical piers made the tower appear slimmer and optically extended its height. Marble, mosaic, and light turned the passage from street to elevator into a ceremony of corporate arrival. McKim's Penn Station turned rail travel into a monumental city gateway through a waiting room inspired by Roman baths. Electric trains and river tunnels moved the tracks underground, creating a great public hall and valuable development space above. Ramps, viaducts, and 2 levels of tracks turned rail movement into an enormous urban organization. Vault, celestial ceiling, balconies, and clock made the concourse more than a waiting area. It became a shared interior of New York. Hotels and offices rose over Grand Central's buried tracks, binding transportation infrastructure to real estate development. Its immense shadow became a symbol of the density crisis, but the Equitable was a scapegoat, not the sole cause of zoning. As office towers grew, light and air stopped being private design choices and became questions of neighborhood and public interest. In 1916, New York would regulate height and use across the city, drawing the future shape of the skyscraper. The 1916 resolution combined use districts and height limits in one of America's first comprehensive zoning systems. A building could rise in proportion to street width, then had to step back to preserve light and air. After the base stepped back, a tower could rise without a height limit on roughly 1/4 of the lot. The law was not written for beauty, yet architects transformed its envelope into a new language of mass and silhouette. Ferris rendered the zoning envelope in charcoal darkness, turning regulation into an image of the future metropolis. Ferris imagined terraced towers balanced between technological utopia and the darker image of concentrated power. Setbacks created New York's wedding cake skyline, turning a legal requirement into the compositional language of Art Deco. Economic growth and transit shifted major office construction, from downtown toward Midtown and Grand Central. The Channon transformed setback massing through terracotta, bronze, and abstract ornament, celebrating movement and technology. Vertical stripes and a rotating globe linked the production of news to the modern aesthetics of the machine. Black brick and gold detail made the American Radiator Building an early experiment in color, material, and the nighttime skyline. Automobile motifs, hoods, wheels, and eagles were lifted into a stainless steel crown above the city. William Van Allen assembled the spire inside the building and raised it into place, turning competition into architectural theater. Completed during economic crisis, the Empire State became a vast speculative office machine wrapped in restrained Art Deco form. Prefabrication, strict delivery schedules, and repeating floors made the project operate like a vertical assembly line. The building did not fill immediately, yet its observatory, lighting, and media image made it a cultural icon before a financial success. Rockefeller Center planned offices, entertainment, art, plazas, and underground circulation as one integrated urban complex. Its slender slab, large studios, and observation deck placed media production at the center of the Midtown skyline. The sunken plaza, stairways, and Prometheus axis created a powerful civic room inside a private development. Light, stage technology, streamlined interiors, and immense scale turned mass entertainment into a total Art Deco environment. Reliefs, murals, and sculpture place stories of labor, technology, and progress directly into everyday circulation. Setback roofs became patterned gardens, shaping views from offices as carefully as the streets below. Blue-green terracotta bands joined factory, office, and billboard into a modern horizontal facade. Geometric entrances, colored brick, and corner windows brought Art Deco into middle-class housing across the Bronx. Even small lobbies used terrazzo, metalwork, and mosaic to give residents a neighborhood-scale experience of modernity. Its exposed steel towers proved that engineering structure could remain visually powerful without the planned stone cladding. Triborough linked 3 boroughs through bridges and viaducts, revealing the automobile scale of Robert Moses' regional city. Wycha's first houses opened tenement blocks to more light, air, and courtyards, translating reform into public housing. Low blocks, courtyards, art, and community services represented the high design expectations of early public housing. Trilon, Perisphere, and Futurama presented cars, suburbs, and technology as a seamless future just before war. Housing shortage, corporate expansion, and major infrastructure investment remade post-war New York both upward and outward. MoMA's 1932 exhibition introduced American audiences to unornamented volume, regular structure, and functional planning as the international style. Goodwin and Stone's glass and metal facade gave modern art a building identity distinct from Fifth Avenue's historic institutions. Parkchester joined curved roads, mid-rise brick blocks, shopping, landscape, and ornament in a large private residential development. Stuyvesant Town scaled the superblock and open landscape for middle-class housing, but an existing neighborhood was cleared to build it. After the war, NYCHE produced thousands of apartments in standardized blocks and open space, becoming one of the city's largest builders. Slab blocks in open landscape promised light and air, but weakened the traditional continuity of street, shop, and block. Open space could become undefined when maintenance, programming, and safety were weak, despite looking generous on plan. An international design team placed modernist slabs and halls on the East River as a new architectural stage for diplomacy. The UN Secretariat replaced the traditional crown tower with an abstract, repetitive, international corporate face. A thin glass slab, raised above a low plaza base, radically changed the Park Avenue office type. The curtain wall carried no structural load. Metal frames and glass formed a light, repeatable skin around the steel skeleton. After Leverhouse, Park Avenue shifted from masonry residential fronts to glass towers and plazas. Mies van der Rohe and Philip Johnson joined bronze, exact proportion, and a recessed plaza in a modernism of exceptional luxury. Pulling the tower back reduced rentable area, but produced a powerful per-public void and immense prestige on Park Avenue. A modern slab and broad plaza inserted superblock scale into the financial district's narrow street fabric. Its enormous mass behind Grand Central revealed how modern corporate scale could dominate both terminal and skyline. Eero Saarinen shaped flight as frozen movement through sweeping concrete shells and flowing interior circulation. Frank Lloyd Wright opposed the Fifth Avenue grid with a white spiral and a continuous ramp that reimagined museum circulation. The Guggenheim's powerful form made one question permanent. Does the building serve the art, or the art serve the building? The 1961 code replaced the old setback envelope. This was with floor area ratio, open space, and more abstract rules for density. FAR tied total floor area to lot size, allowing very different building forms to carry the same density. Developers could gain extra floor area by providing public plazas, producing many new spaces of very uneven quality. Moses built roads, parks, and civic facilities, while centralized power also magnified displacement and weakened democratic control. The highway accelerated regional traffic, while cutting through neighborhoods and displacing thousands of residents. Slum clearance programs often replaced repair with wholesale demolition, superblocks, and institutional redevelopment. Opera, concert, and theater buildings were organized around an axial plaza, making culture both monument and redevelopment instrument. Lincoln Center rose through major clearance in the multiracial San Juan Hill neighborhood, covering a geography of displacement. The Unisphere, pavilions, and automobile-centered future turned modernism into a stage for mass consumption. Modernism promised light, openness, and order, but the scale of highways, superblocks, and demolition strengthened neighborhood and preservation movements. A plan announced in 1962 would remove Penn Station's upper structure for Madison Square Garden and an office complex. Architects and citizens demanded renovation instead of destruction, but existing institutions had no power to stop the demolition. The monumental halls were dismantled piece by piece, while trains continued to run beneath the site. The loss entered public memory not only as a vanished facade, but as the destruction of a shared urban interior. The 1965 law institutionalized preservation. Penn Station did not create the movement, but accelerated older efforts. Wyckoff House, Brooklyn Borough Hall, and other early sites became symbolic tests of the new preservation system. Brooklyn Heights protected an entire streetscape rather than isolated monuments, establishing a district-scale preservation model. Jacobs argued that diversity, short blocks, old and new buildings, and eyes on the street produced urban life. Neighborhood coalitions defeated plans for an automobile route through Washington Square and helped make the park car-free. The proposed expressway through Soho and Little Italy was canceled after resistance, allowing threatened blocks to survive. Soon after designation, a Marcel Breuer office tower was proposed above the terminal. Both proposals preserved parts of the terminal, while radically changing its mass and position in the skyline. The campaign made Grand Central a question of shared civic memory, not only expert taste. The court ruled that landmark regulation was not an unconstitutional taking, strengthening preservation law nationwide. Soho established industrial and commercial buildings as legitimate urban heritage, not merely obsolete real estate. Large, inexpensive, light-filled lofts drew artists. Illegal live work arrangements were gradually recognized by regulation. Soho became a powerful model for giving old buildings new uses without demolition, helped by flexible open floors. Preservation saved the buildings but did not preserve affordability or mixed production, and it could not stop gentrification. Warehouses became spacious homes, turning industrial fabric into a new high-income residential district. A neighborhood campaign saved the courthouse and converted it into a library, proving that new use could sustain preservation. Preservation made ships and warehouses visible as a historic district, but raised tension between public history and commercial entertainment. Kevin Roche and John Dinkeloo arranged glass and steel offices around an enormous planted atrium. The Ford Foundation offered Midtown a protected, layered, publicly accessible urban landscape. Its giant columns, sloped crown, church relationship, and public interior emerged from a complex urban negotiation. A wind risk discovery led to secret nighttime strengthening. This raised lasting questions about engineering ethics and transparency. A monumental Chippendale pediment answered the modern glass box with historical reference and corporate irony. Postmodernism restored ornament and recognizable forms, making the corporate tower communicative as well as serious. The plan replaced the superblock with streets, blocks, parks, and stone-clad buildings intended to reconnect with the older city. By the 1980s, design increasingly addressed street walls, cornice lines, materials, and the scale of surrounding blocks. Preservation and reuse helped save New York, but the same tools became engines of value growth and displacement. The fiscal crisis cut maintenance, housing, and infrastructure investment, making physical decay the visible face of economic and political collapse. Redlining, job loss, discrimination, and public neglect produced widespread abandonment and fire. This was not natural decline. Images of ruins can be powerful, but they can erase the communities that remained, repaired, and organized. Neighborhood groups turned vacant lots into gardens, producing care, food, and public space from below. Residents repaired abandoned buildings and converted some into cooperatives. Architecture became a collective process of making. Suburban-style houses promised ownership and stability on devastated blocks, sharply departing from the dense urban fabric around them. Church coalitions and prefabricated methods produced large numbers of affordable rowhouses and rebuilt parts of East Brooklyn. Community rooms, parks, schoolyards, and streets formed the early architectural infrastructure of hip-hop outside formal institutions. The loft adapted by artists was repackaged as luxury living, turning industrial openness into a status aesthetic. Large windows, cobblestone streets, and expansive apartments made Tribeca a model of preservation joined to high-income housing. Factories and warehouses became studios, offices, and housing, creating a new creative economy district along the East River. Converting an old public school into an art center joined adaptive reuse with experimental culture in Queens. Historic harbor buildings were revived through shops and restaurants, combining preservation, tourism, and consumption. Built on Hudson River landfill, Battery Park City added streets, parks, and stone-clad housing to Lower Manhattan. Cesar Pelli's towers created a corporate skyline of varied crowns around the public interior of the Winter Garden. The Esplanade converted a formerly closed working edge into continuous public space for walking, play, and views. Yamasaki's repeated 110-story facades redefined Lower Manhattan's skyline and the global image of trade. Closely spaced perimeter columns and a central core created broad office floors with few internal columns. The enormous plaza created monumental emptiness but erased Radio Row's street network and produced a windy, single-use superblock. Economic decline and the adult industry occupied Times Square, beside decaying buildings and an already powerful media landscape. Public agencies, tax incentives, and major corporations reshaped 42nd Street through theater restoration and new offices. Its restoration joined Broadway heritage to the investment strategy of a major entertainment company. In Times Square, illuminated signs became not merely permitted, but required to preserve the district's identity. The Condé Nast Tower accelerated corporate reinvestment and became an early high-rise experiment in energy efficiency. Interior landmark protection recognized that performance heritage lives in the stage, auditorium, decoration, and circulation, not only the facade. Brownstone restoration revived historic housing while also increasing investment and displacement pressure. Landmark status can protect identity and continuity, while also increasing values, rent pressure, and selective narratives of history. At the century's end, the Twin Towers defined downtown, while the Empire State and newer offices anchored Midtown. The attacks killed thousands and destroyed the World Trade Center. Here, architectural history must begin with human loss. After destruction, the question was not only what to build, but how loss, safety, public space, and daily life could share one site. The site became a geography of rescue, identification, labor, mourning, and months of debris removal. Much of the wall holding back the Hudson remained standing, and later became a central historical element of the museum. Photographs, candles, missing person notices, and spontaneous shrines turned public surfaces into spaces of collective memory before official design began. National memorial, local loss, transit, security, and real estate demands entered the same negotiation with unequal power. Thousands of participants rejected dense early office schemes and demanded open space, streets, and a stronger memorial program. The international competition treated the site as a relationship among memory, transportation, streets, and new towers, not one building. The winning plan proposed leaving the tower footprints empty, exposing the slurry wall, and rebuilding the skyline. Keeping the former tower footprints unbuilt made physical absence the fixed center of the master plan. Reopening Greenwich Street aimed to reconnect the World Trade Center with the surrounding neighborhoods after the superblock. The rebuilt site had to appear public and connected while meeting unprecedented demands for blast resistance, evacuation, and controlled access. From thousands of submissions, Michael Arad and Peter Walker's Reflecting Absence was selected. Water surrounds the tower footprints, turning physical absence into a space that can be measured, heard, and felt. The continuous waterfalls mask surrounding traffic and draw attention toward the void below. Names were organized through family, workplace, and personal relationships rather than simple alphabetical order. Hundreds of trees bring shade and seasonal change to the hard plaza, connecting memorial space to everyday city life. The museum descends around original foundations, the slurry wall, and surviving steel tridents, turning the historical site into the exhibition itself. The new tower was the first completed building, restoring Greenwich Street, while advancing security and energy standards. Rebuilding became a fragmented urban composition, shaped by different architects, developers, budgets, and timelines. Libeskind's asymmetrical Freedom Tower evolved into David Child's more symmetrical, security-driven design. The architectural height was set at 1,776 feet, invoking the year of the Declaration of Independence. Clipped corners transform the square base into an octagon at mid-height and a rotated square at the top. A windowless, reinforced base improved protection, but weakened street connection, leading to attempts to soften it visually. The tower did not erase the absence in the skyline, it reframed it as a new symbol of security, memory, and corporate life. Calatrava's white-ribbed structure turned a transit interchange into a dramatic public interior. Path, subway, and retail corridors merged into one monumental machine for transportation, commerce, and tourism. Its conical reflector carried daylight above a difficult subway interchange and created a new center for entry and orientation. Neighborhood advocates proposed a public park instead of demolition, giving abandoned freight infrastructure a new future. The elevated park converted industrial infrastructure into a pedestrian route, landscape, and platform for viewing the city. The design preserved rails and the feeling of spontaneous growth, while combing paving into planted space. One study found a roughly 35.3% value premium nearest the High Line, revealing unequal gains from design success. After the 2008 financial crisis, low interest rates, global capital, and scarce Manhattan land fueled a new wave of ultra-luxury towers. Unused development rights from neighboring lots could be combined, turning air into transferable and financialized building capacity. 157 combined hotel and luxury housing on West 57th Street, helping launch the new wave of Billionaires Row. Park views, narrow parcels, and global investment demand produced a sequence of exceptionally slender residential towers. A rigid white concrete grid of equal square windows became an abstract obelisk rising 1,396 feet above Manhattan. Open mechanical levels allow wind to pass through the tower, helping reduce loads and movement. High-strength concrete, deep foundations, and tuned mass dampers keep extreme slenderness within tolerable movement. With an extraordinary slenderness ratio, the tower raises terracotta and bronze detailing on a remarkably thin structure. The new tower preserves and restores Steinway Hall at its base, joining landmark air rights to contemporary supertall development. Retail and ultra-luxury housing rise above a large podium in one of Billionaires Row's tallest peaks. Long shadows from super-tall towers turned private development rights into a debate over the experience of a public park. Some ultra-luxury towers are criticized as stores of global capital rather than dense housing, though use varies by project. Cantilevered apartments stack like individual houses, breaking the repetition of the conventional residential tower. An exposed diagrid turns the structural system into the identity of the facade. The tower was developed through MoMA's air rights and new gallery space, joining cultural institution and luxury housing economics. Renzo Piano's museum uses terraces, exterior stairs, and industrial scale to create a cultural anchor at the southern end of the High Line. The park became a linear showcase of housing, hotels, galleries, and offices by many architects. Rezoning and transit access produced new high-rise residential clusters beyond Manhattan. Former industrial shoreline became towers and parks. Public access increased while industrial jobs and lower rents declined. The landmark refiner was preserved while housing, offices, and a waterfront park reshaped the larger industrial site. Low-energy academic buildings, housing, and landscape formed a new urban campus for the technology economy. Rezoning, the subway extension, and development rights prepared a new business and residential center above an active rail yard. Steel and concrete platforms create artificial land, while trains continue to operate below. The glass office tower rises over the High Line, linking former freight infrastructure to a new commercial center. The angled crown and projecting observation deck turn a corporate tower into a high-altitude tourism experience. The residential tower joins the Shed and the Plaza, combining culture, luxury housing, and large-scale development. Interlocking stairs became an object of viewing, but access and safety concerns made its use continually contested. A movable outer shell allows the performance space to expand over the plaza as a flexible cultural machine.
Open space remains shaped by private management, surveillance, consumption, and rules that define the real limits of public life.
Terracotta-banded setbacks and major transit investment represent a new generation of zoning agreement beside Grand Central. COVID-19 suddenly emptied offices and transit hubs, reframing density through distance, ventilation, and indoor air quality. Open streets turned traffic lanes into temporary space for walking, play, and neighborhood activity. Restaurant sheds and sidewalk arrangements evolved from emergency health measures into a permanent street design debate. Remote and hybrid work changed the value of older offices and the daily rhythm of central business districts. Office conversions produced many homes from 2010 to 2020. But newer deep plan build buildings can be harder to adapt. A new courtyard and added floors help transform deep office plates into more than 1,000 apartments. Office floors may be too deep for housing. Window distance, plumbing, egress, and structure define the real limits of conversion. In July 2026, 2 columns buckled during a major conversion, exposing the risks of added floors and structural intervention while the cause remained under investigation. Reusing a building can save carbon and cost, but requires investigation, load analysis, sequencing, strengthening, and independent inspection. City of Yes for Housing Opportunity introduced New York's broadest citywide zoning changes in decades to make more housing possible. The reform combines affordability incentives, office conversion, transit-oriented growth, and reduced parking requirements in selected areas. Supporters expect more supply and variety. Critics question infrastructure, displacement, and how much housing will be truly affordable. Local Law 97 limits emissions from large buildings, and its success depends on retrofit finance, a cleaner grid, and public health outcomes. The first compliance period applies to 2024 emissions, while limits become much stricter in 2030. Insulation, windows, heat recovery, controls, and shading turn invisible technical work into a major design field. Replacing fossil fuel boilers with heat pumps can reduce building carbon as the electrical grid becomes cleaner. Concrete and steel contain large amounts of embodied carbon. Reuse can avoid the initial emissions of new construction. Updated rules create space for lower carbon systems such as mass timber, though fire, supply, and scale require careful management. OMA's new building doubles the museum's gallery space while connecting a distinct new volume to the existing Sanaa structure. Sandy accelerated adaptive planning, but the central question remains: who is protected, who decides, and who bears the cost? The initiative encouraged flood protection that also works as park, berm, public program, and neighborhood infrastructure. The project raises the park and adds barriers, while demolition, long construction, and lost access generated intense opposition. The project lifts the waterfront edge while integrating flood protection with a historic park and complex underground infrastructure. Proposals move the shoreline outward and upward through fill, barriers, pumps, and new public space. Rain gardens, permeable surfaces, green roofs, and storage systems hold water on site instead of sending it immediately to sewers. Energy upgrades, flood resilience, and basic repair must advance together. Technical goals are insufficient without resident participation. Preservation increasingly includes Black, Latinx, LGBTQ+, immigrant, labor, and everyday places, not only elite design. Future architectural history must recognize Lenape geography as a living presence in place names, public art, and governance, not only an opening chapter. Digital models now test energy, maintenance, evacuation, and climate scenarios across the full life of a building. New York's architecture remains a negotiation over what is saved, what is demolished, who can live here, and how risk is shared.